Washington, D.C. tomorrow. Okay, it's 1 o'clock in Chicago. What do you think? Should we get rolling?
I think that sounds good.
Why don't you go to our welcome screen and I'll say hi to everybody from my end. This is Bob Burdenski, a general annual giving nuisance, case author, um, well-traveled conference attendee, and curious about texting like all of you. Before I say hi to Rachel, let me just say, to be clear, I am not compensated in any way for this appearance. When you travel the sponsor halls at conferences, you sort of get to know who seems like they've got a good business going for themselves. And so I've gotten to know Rachel and the folks at Get Thru, and really just came to believe that the time for me to upgrade my knowledge about texting and fundraising was at hand. But I'm just really participating in this like all of you, just because I want to know more and want to understand some of the nuances of texting and how we think about it in annual giving. Joining me from the Bay Area of San Francisco is my friend from Get Thru, and the text-pert for today's session is Rachel Cleary. Rachel, say hi and say whatever else you want to say about yourself.
Thanks, Bob. Nice to meet everybody. My name is Rachel. Hello from Oakland, California. Bob very kindly gave me the title of text-pert for today, which I will take. I work with our education clients here at Get Thru, helping them build out strategy for texting for annual giving, alumni relations, anything else you can think of regarded to education. I actually come from a higher ed fundraising background myself. I have 7 years experience in the annual giving field, so I really love being able to still be a part of it in this way.
And so Rachel and I are just going to have a chat. We will make available two things after we're done. One is all the slides, you'll get the handouts, so don't worry about scribbling notes about stuff if you don't want to. And second, we're recording this in the unlikely event someone wants to hear this again. You'll have that link to rewatch the whole thing, and you'll have to explain why you wanted to do that. But so just know we'll have both of those things available when we're done, okay? Rachel has put up the agenda screen. I'm gonna talk for a few minutes just on my perspective on how I've seen texting evolve. We've made a couple of runs at texting over the years, and I think it's finally arrived with some functionality and some usefulness that makes me think it's not going to go away, and in fact is going to become a useful channel for those of us trying to connect with our audiences. So I'll talk a little bit about that. We'll sort of sketch out an overview of the different ways to use texting. You know, there's different considerations if you're talking about outbound texting versus inbound texting. We'll just talk through some of that stuff. I'm really going to throw the ball to Rachel at that point and let her talk specifically about the kind of person-to-person texting that Get Thru offers, and she can tell you a little bit about those bells and whistles. And then we'll just do a wrap-up if there's any questions people want to throw our way. I have accumulated some good knowledge about texting, you know, over the last year or two. In no way does that make me a definitive authority. There's certainly other products out there in addition to Get Thru. I'm not going to expect Rachel to be conversant on all of those nuances, but we'll answer what we can and hopefully ramp up your knowledge about texting and see if we can have a thoughtful chat. Let's go to the banana slide. Which is my chuckle reminder of how I've seen channels sort of emerge and evolve and kind of peak over the years in annual giving. The very first case conference I ever went to was about 25 years ago when phonathons were still quite new. And they literally, in one session, passed around the room a bowl of bananas. And everybody took a banana and held it to their face so you could simulate the experience of actually calling somebody on the phone and asking for a gift. That's how new phonathons were, and the whole thing was new as a channel. And the next slide has a VHS training tape that I still have in my office. Look at that old thing. The case, we didn't even know what to call it. Look at the word phoniation there. The next slide is now my problem. I can't even watch that anymore because they're not even making VHS players. So, you know, if you've stuck around as long as I guess I have in this, you sort of see channels emerge and become the central thing. And you know, we didn't decide to have this session to say anything bad about phonathons, but you know, a lot of you know as well as me. I think we're sort of right-sizing phonathons. I know getting people on the phone is a frustration. I personally don't think phonathons are going away, but the heyday of phonathons, you know, which goes back to my banana holding days, you know, certainly seems to have crested a little bit. So, like you, I'm always on the search of what's the next new thing and what's the next bright idea. What do we have next here? I think it's the transition into the text conversation. Push
That's
the
right.
forward button, right?
There we go.
Still coming through on my end. Is that the slide with the tube advertisement?
Yes, that's where we are right now.
Okay, mine's still stuck on the VHS one, but I'm going to keep talking and maybe things will catch up on my screen. So I think we're looking at a tube advertisement. The very first time that I ever saw texting as a fundraising strategy was on the tube in London, of all places. And I think it was connected, now I see it, I think it was connected back then to a Live Aid concert. If you're listening and don't know what Live Aid is, ask your parents. But they were the first ones that I ever saw that connected sending a text message as a fundraising strategy. And at the time, Rachel, let's go to the next one, which I think has the New York Times headline. Oh, there was this MGive Foundation that became central. This was about 10 or 12 years ago, to how people could text a gift. And through this MGive Foundation, the gift would wind up being added to somebody's cell phone bill. That was the only way that you could use text, and the MGive Foundation sort of had a corner on the market. I just Googled them the other day. They've now become the Mobile Fund. They still offer this as a service if you want people to text a gift and have it automatically added to their cell phone bill. But there's now so many other ways to use texting that we'll talk about. This isn't the one-stop shopping idea that it used to be back in 2010 or so. There was a famous article in Case Currents. I think the next slide is an article that was in the New York Times that talked about the limitations of texting way back when, about 12 years ago. It was hard to see who the donor was. Technically, the donor became the MGive Foundation. There was a cap to how much somebody could text as a gift. There was concern we were converting $1,000 donors to $25 donors because of texting. And so a lot of us kind of said out of the pool with texting. That was the only way you could use it, and it sure seemed kind of flawed for a variety of all those reasons. And so we kind of wrote its demise, I think, in some ways. But over time, different providers started to pop up, different thinking about how to use texting started to emerge. It didn't all have to funnel through that MGive Foundation. It didn't just have to be an added charge onto somebody's cell phone bill. And lo and behold, you know, people started coming back to the table, and the exhibit hall at a conference started to get filled up with different types of service providers offering text. Now, if you go to the next one, I think there's a whole lot of nuances to, is it outbound texting? Is it inbound texting? You know, this is like the doors of a restaurant kitchen. I think there's a whole big difference between if you're thinking about using texting as an outbound message sending device, or if you're offering it as an inbound way for people to make gifts, or both. So it's a pretty robust set of offerings that I see out there now with a bunch of different service providers. And we're going to walk you through a little bit of the nuance of that stuff over the next couple of slides. So the next one, I think, is from a college that's doing one of their giving days like they've done for the last couple of years. And they send out this postcard with the opportunity for somebody to text their gift and make that gift through a text message. You don't need to have a service provider if you want to offer this as part of your giving day, or just to give people the opportunity to tell you that they want to make a gift. You can have an office phone that has the ability to receive a text message and tell people, text to this number that I want to make a pledge, somebody call me to complete the details. You don't need a provider to do that. And I think it's worth thinking about. Is there just a way to use text as a channel for anybody on December 31st or on our giving day or on June 30th or Giving Tuesday that wants to wave their arms via a text message and say, I make a pledge of $100, somebody get in touch with me to complete my gift. It could be that simple if you want it to be that simple. This college, looks like they're using an inbound text to give provider. I don't know exactly which one, but to me, that's one smart nuance to this, is how do you take some of your traditional direct mail or paper channels and add text giving as an element to that. So that's sort of one wing of the building about how you use inbound texting. It can be as simple as just having a cell phone in the office that people can send a text message to. But there's other providers out there that will offer different bells and whistles if you want to consider other functionality. One of those is on the next page. I think these folks are Give by Cell. This is a downtown Chicago summer concert series that I go to every year. It's completely free. It's a perfect way to spend a summer night in Chicago. You don't need a ticket, you just need a blanket. And I'm always proud of the annual giving person for this orchestra who during the intermission walks out onto the stage and says, isn't it a beautiful night and isn't it great? We've got free concerts in Chicago. Raise your hand if you support continued free music in downtown Chicago on warm summer nights. And everybody raises their hand. You can see I was here for their 4th of July concert a couple years ago. And the guy says, if you want to support the orchestra, I invite you to take that raised hand and text these 4 letters, GPMF. And in reply, then on my cell phone, I get this message that links to the mobile-friendly screen on the right there, which is their provider of how they want to handle inbound text to give messaging. Notice that this works really well in a location-specific place. You know, it would be easy just to put these instructions on a paper postcard or any other outbound channel that you're using for your annual giving program. And for this orchestra, they like the functionality of then having this mobile-friendly screen that I can click on and put in my credit card details and all that information. So this is the kind of provider that is out there. Give by Cell is one. There are plenty of others that are easy to Google, and you can find them in the sponsor hall at any annual giving conference you get to. But I'm just trying to differentiate the nuances of how you use text for gifts that you want to direct into the office, slightly differently from how you use text to send messages out from the office. So the postcard on the previous slide, along with this sort of location-specific experience that I have every summer in Chicago, are 2 ways to use text to facilitate gifts coming into the office, and several providers that will offer you bells and whistles for doing that. Okay, what's next? This is a good reminder. We know the legality questions are going to come up during this conversation, and so we wanted to make a run at framing those for you. When you start to talk about outbound text messaging, that's when you need to just be aware of what some of the legalities are, or at least what best practice is. Some of my phonathon friends that are listening in, God bless you, you may be of a certain age where you can remember TCPA, which was the telephone, I don't even remember what CPA is, telephone CPA. And there were all the rules that we had to be mindful of running a phonathon, which we were exempt from being educational institutions. And you know, just because we don't have to pay attention to the National Do Not Call registry, which I think is the old picture that I dug out on the next slide there, you know, it's still not best practice if we're not removing people who don't want to be called. And all that legislation that started with this do not call registry still exists today. It's just been updated and modified now because we live in a text world. The important takeaway about legality is that we're exempt as not-for-profits and educational institutions from all of the restrictions on broadcast emails and phone calls still to this day. But there's a distinction that just because you can legally thumb your nose at people, you still sort of lose the war, right? If their perception is that you're being callous about how you're using phone calls or how you're using texting. The next slide is really just an update on how the TCPA legislation has been updated. Back in 2012, when texting first started to become a thing as a fundraising strategy, they went back and dusted off the telephone legislation and gave it an update relevant to texting. So there you can see there are restrictions on how businesses use automated calls and how they use text messages, automated text messages. There's restrictions on who can send text messages to cell phones, but most everybody listening in to this chat is exempt from that legislation in the same way you were exempt from the do not call legislation that predated it back in the 90s or so. Again, your legal office may have a stronger opinion about this. A lot of the vendors that you might use for outbound texting in particular might encourage you to have some opt-in mechanism, but you're not legally required in the writing of that legislation because you're an exempt not-for-profit institution. But also with the asterisk and the caveat at the bottom of that slide there, that there is a best practice understanding that you won't abuse the privilege, and where there's an opportunity to get folks to opt in sort of a user-friendly way, a lot of places will encourage that. The next slide, I've got a picture of the Harvard alumni texting sort of opt-in screen. So their alumni and development office, they will send blast text messages, and even though, as I understand the legislation, they're not required to have all that opt-in, they still offer it because they want that extra layer of legal firm ground, probably their lawyer saying that we really ought to make sure we have permissions for this. As I understand it, they're not required to do that, but there is a whole lot of best practice that says we ought to really give people a chance to opt in. And we'll make the distinction when Rachel talks in particular about blast emails or big information emails that go to a broad audience versus the person-to-person texting that providers like Get Thru are offering. There's probably other corners of your campus that are doing blast text messages now. Rachel, that next one is what you see at a lot of places where they're trying to get students and they're trying to get parents signed up for emergency text messages. They invite people to sign up, again, because I don't know who wouldn't. The kids want to know if there's no classes the next day. The parents want to know anytime there's any emergency news going on campus. So that seems like a no-brainer to me to offer that opt-in requirement, because that's an audience that's going to want to get messages. So again, I don't technically think they're required to do that, but for that purpose and with those audiences, it's easy for them to just make that a requirement. You also, as part of this conversation, I think, be sure to check up on what your admissions office is up to, which is the next slide. Those folks have tended to be ahead of us in how they're incorporating text messaging with prospective students. Same thing with them, that because they're an educational institution and aren't technically selling, it gives them latitude to communicate with prospective students. Different places might have opt-in parameters if you want to continue to communicate with the admissions office via text, but again, that's up to them. As part of your thought process about what you want to do next with text, I just think in general you ought to go across campus to your admissions friends and just be sure you understand how they're using it, because there might be some synergies with what's going on there. Okay, I'm getting close to the end of my historical context before I throw the ball to Rachel. The last point that I really want to make, um, and Rachel will too, is how I have seen a lot of the channels that we use in annual giving in education and other not-for-profits really get their genesis in political campaigning. Um, Phone rooms used to be the thing you would go to in the middle of town when you wanted to spend some time calling on behalf of your favorite presidential candidate. I'll bet Richard Nixon had great phone rooms once upon a time, right? And then that became best practice for what we did in education fundraising. I'm sure there was a similar thing with direct mail. I think Barack Obama's campaign really put email on the map as a fundraising idea. We were sort of considering it, I think, in education fundraising, and then there were all the headlines about how much money was being raised in political campaigns. That then it became, why weren't we more quick on the take in education fundraising with doing email? That really dragged a lot of us into the pool, in my observation, in terms of defining best practice for education fundraising with email. And Rachel, I really believe that we're at another sort of tipping point from a channel point of view. And am I right in saying that once again we can look at political campaigns as the place where this idea kind of started?
Absolutely. I think that's true, Bob. I mean, I'm sure many folks on the webinar today will have already gotten a ton of text messages from their favorite political candidate this cycle. We really saw it build out of the 2016 presidential campaign. In fact, our founders were campaign staffers, and they really worked on doing digital organizing and building out that digital ground game, including building a texting program for the Bernie Sanders campaign. So after that campaign ended, they realized that texting could have use for many people outside of presidentials, from political campaigns to nonprofits and education. So they launched our company Get Thru in late 2016 following that campaign. And then from there, it's been built out, and we've started working with more education clients and nonprofits, direct service organizations. And like Bob says, we can take in different types of work, so many examples from what political campaigns do.
So let's go to the next one. Maybe we should have started with this, but the reason I am leaning forward and paying attention to text is some of these statistics that Rachel brought to the table. Anything you want to say about any of these?
Yeah, so I think it's just important to know that we all know how hard it is to get our constituents' attention these days. So few people, people get so many emails, people get so much direct mail that it's just overloading for them. But, everyone is still on their phone all the time. So as you see here, 97% of American adults text weekly, 99% of texts get read, and texting is fast. It's 68 times faster than calls, according to a lot of different studies. So it's just a way to reach your audience where they are and where they can take a few seconds to pay attention to your message. And this slide kind of reiterates what I said the last slide. So the average people get more than 120 emails per day. That's a lot. I know I personally do not read all the emails I get every day. I do a lot of just mass deletes. The average email marketing response rate these days is 0.12%. So that's pretty dismal. And the average direct mail response rate is hovering around 4.4%. So again, it just really speaks to how can we innovate and build on the channels that we're already using, and also reach people in new ways.
So the other important nuance for me in my education about texting, that is another good handoff point to Rachel talking about Get Thru, is the distinction between broadcast emails, where you're sort of sending one message out to a big list of folks, give for our giving day today. The distinction between that and person-to-person or P2P texting, which I think is a nuance really worth thinking about, especially for those of you at institutions who work with volunteers. This is descendant from class agent fundraising, what to do with PHONATHON callers who maybe just aren't reaching prospects, but we don't want just sitting there. This is where I really start to see texting matching up with what have been sort of proven annual giving strategies over the years. So there's the broadcast email idea, but there's also this person-to-person P2P use of texting that I wanted Rachel to talk a little bit about. Over to you.
Alrighty, so Bob has laid out some of the distinctions, and just to build on that, so the difference between broadcast or text to give and peer-to-peer texting, nothing in peer-to-peer texting is automated. You can't sort of send like a blast all at once to 1,000 people, 10,000 people. But what you can do using a platform like ours is upload your list of 1,000 or 10,000, have it all in one single dashboard, and then you click send for each person. It goes pretty quickly. But it's peer-to-peer means real people sending real messages. And then there's using peer-to-peer texting platforms, you can build out similar to PHONATHON scripting so that you have your replies on hand at the ready. So then when people write back to you, you can immediately send them a response for when they say they'll give, if they say they won't give, or think about your scripting for whatever type of outreach that you're doing. And then this slide just kind of shows a visual overview of the difference between text to give and peer-to-peer texting. On the left-hand side, you'll see the text to give slide, which has that kind of 5-digit number. It's automated. It just says it's not personalized. It says it's giving day. Text give to make a gift, and it has that text stop to cancel language. On the right-hand side, shows a peer-to-peer message, which comes from a real 10-digit phone number. You can build it out to be really personalized, so you can include merge fields just like you would for direct mail or email. And then when someone writes back to you and says, yes, I would like to give, you can just send them a link, send them another personalized message. And it's really just, peer-to-peer says it all, right? It's a real person talking to another person, and they're just having a conversation via text. So what we also wanted to do was show you a few examples of how other schools are using peer-to-peer texting. The first example that we have here is Pitzer College. They are located in Southern California, and they are a small college. And what they've done for one of their recent peer-to-peer texting campaigns was an end of fiscal year pledge fulfillment outreach. So they took 96 alumni who had pledged to give throughout the fiscal year, texted them all and just said, hi, this is my name from Pitzer College. Thank you so much for your pledge amount. Can I send you the link to make your gift today? And then 22% of those folks that they texted wrote back to them. Many of them said, that 7% number represents those who said, yes, I'd like to fulfill my pledge. 0 people opted out, and 1 person ran this campaign. So, she was able to just kind of take an afternoon and very quickly reach out to folks who had pledged to give without having to call each person, one by one, getting on your phone list and taking that time to make the calls. And then this slide shows an example of what a pledge fulfillment outreach text could look like using Get Thru's platform. This is not a real message, but it gives you an idea of what merge fields can look like. So you'll see the hi Rebecca, that's the recipient name. The text is coming from Dustin, that's a merge field for the sender name. And then you can use merge text as well to indicate what the pledge amount was, to which fund they pledged, and then just asking, prompting a conversation to say, can I send you the link to make your gift now? So when someone writes back, if they say, yes, I'd like to fulfill my pledge, you can send them a link to your giving landing page. So, your payment processing in this instance would be done just as it would for your regular online giving platform. And you can just say, thanks, we're grateful for your support. And then that person will have the link to make their pledge. Next up, I wanted to share an example from William and Mary from their One Tribe, One Day texting campaign, which was their giving day. They did really great outreach to, as you'll see here, more than 17,000 people, breaking that into 4 segments. And from texting, they raised more than $52,000 from 626 donors. And just wanted to share a couple sample response rates from their segments, because I think it gives you a good idea of who responds to texting in this type of outreach. So the young alums had a 6% response rate. Sci-Buns had a 3% response rate, and Lie-Buns, or current donors, responded at a rate of 21%. And they recruited their student workers and staff members to kind of bring a bunch of folks in to help get these messages out and really, add another channel for Giving Day.
Rachel, for anybody who doesn't know, William & Mary has the highest alumni participation rate of any public university. A lot of people don't even realize William & Mary is a public university. But if you're one of those places that still has a big focus on participation, you don't need to look anywhere other than the place that has the highest participation in the U.S. to see that they're trying all channels and leaving no stones unturned. And so it's meaningful to me that they've embraced this as an idea with their Giving Day.
That's a great point. Thanks for sharing that. On another Giving Day, I wanted to look at UC Berkeley and their Giving Day, which they call Big Give. This is from Big Give 2018, I believe. So as part of this Giving Day, they reach out to a lot of different folks, and it's all hands from across all areas of campus. So there's lots of email, direct mail, etc. But the university's central university development office did some text outreach to a few different segments. Now, this first bullet point says, raise more than $170,000 from those who received a text. I do want to make the distinction that this wasn't just from texting alone. This was from all channels. But what they did after they pulled their giving reports was compare that donor list with who received a text and try to see, of those folks who got a text, who gave. So, we always want to say correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation, right? But it's just a good way to add another channel for those Giving Days where it's, all hands on deck and participation is really important. So as part of their text outreach on Big Give, they texted nearly 10,000 people to a couple different segments. So they texted parents, Cal Fund donors, a small segment of student athletes, just to test some student outreach. And then graduates of the College of Chemistry, again, just to kind of test how graduates from a specific academic area might respond to texting. And in terms of reaching out to parents, they really leveraged that peer-to-peer mindset and brought in parent volunteers to do some texting on the day of. So they had them come in the morning, did a quick training on how to use the Get Thru platform, and just got them texting right away. And, it's a really nice thing for a parent to hear from another parent asking them to, support their students. And it's a great way to leverage peer-to-peer texting and peer-to-peer asks generally.
Rachel, we just got the question about if William & Mary had an opt-in layer. And to our knowledge, none of the examples we're talking about in this talk has an opt-in layer, right?
For William & Mary, that's correct. The only one that had an opt-in layer that I'm aware of is Haverford, which we'll talk about next. But to talk more generally about opt-ins for peer-to-peer texting, how I always think of it is, think of it how you use your contact information that you have for PHONATHON, direct mail, and email. If someone's given you their information because they're an alumnus or because they're a student or parent, as long as they don't have stated contact preferences and you honor their opt-out requests on any channel, because it's peer-to-peer, nothing's automated, it's real messages sent by real people, you don't need to get express opt-in unless your school kind of has that rule, if that makes sense.
And while I'm thinking of it, just in case people are wondering, I mean, you guys at Get Thru are not in the inbound giving business. So, you're not funneling any money through your site. If there's a link in the text messages that you send out, it's typically a link to the institution's own giving page, right? So there's no PCI compliance issues, and that's just not your racket to be facilitating those payments. You're just really the platform to send a lot of personal text messages to a broad audience in a fairly user-friendly way, right?
Yeah, and thanks for making that distinction. And, that kind of makes me think about, just wanted to note what other schools have done when including their own giving links in text messages. You can create a giving landing page so that you can, if you use appeal codes or whatever kind of tracking, you can track which gifts are coming in from text messages, or you can set up, specific trackable links. I've seen schools set up links where the donor's first name, last name, like gift amount, and the giving area is pre-populated. So there's lots of different ways to get creative with the links that you use. But like you say, Bob, we don't deal with the PCI compliance issue, and we don't have a payment processing platform.
Got it. So
Yeah.
Speaking of Haverford,
Yes, speaking of Haverford, they had a really interesting text campaign that they did that I wanted to highlight because it's a little different from your typical annual giving outreach, but I think it works well for folks who, work on events. They did an alumni weekend text concierge. So they took 387 people who registered for the event and got their opt-ins for this one. So they reached out to everybody ahead of time to say, would you like to receive text during alumni weekend? Because this was kind of a pilot program and they were sort of testing the waters to see how folks would respond. But they texted those registrants and just said, hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm a student at Haverford. I'm going to be your text concierge for the weekend while you're here for alumni weekend. If you have any questions about events, things that are happening, please reach out to me and I'll be here to send you whatever information that you need. So they just had a couple student workers sitting in the office throughout the weekend responding to messages as they came in. And it was just a nice kind of like event stewardship or extra point of contact for folks who are on campus during a busy weekend, and just a really kind of cool and creative way to use texting.
So I'm lost on campus. Somebody come and save me.
Exactly.
There's been too much construction. I don't recognize the place. Yeah.
Where am I supposed to be? We've all been there. Another campaign we wanted to highlight is coming from Vassar in downstate New York. They did some calendar year outreach to alums in their reunion year. So this wasn't like an express, reunion campaign. They just wanted to take advantage of the fact that some people were in reunion year to remind them of that and ask them to give in honor of their class year. So they texted just over 1,200 people, got a 20% response rate and 12% pledge rate. 2 staff members ran this campaign. And again, it's just a nice way to touch base with folks and say, hey, it's your reunion year. That's really great. We hope that you'll make a gift in honor of your class and so that we can continue the great work that we do here at Vassar. And then on that note, just wanted to share an example of what class reunion outreach might look like using texting generally. So this is the idea is if someone, you had class agents or alumni volunteers that were helping you do class reunion outreach. So think of Catherine being the volunteer from college university, texting her classmate Rachel, fellow classmates from the class of 2004, asking them to give $150 in honor of their 15th reunion. And, kind of build out your scripting from that sort of template. Think about reunion asks in general. And this was just an idea of reunion outreach using texting.
And so before you go to the next one, let me just say, for places like Vassar or places like Pitzer, that for years have been working with volunteers and sort of play to the strength of their intimacy as an institution. To me, this is just another extension of that kind of feeling, whether it's class agents communicating with their fellow classmates or parents talking to parents. And that model, I know, doesn't fit every size institution, but in my observation, I mean, if you have been trying to hand the microphone to other people over the years, whether it's volunteer callers or doing class agent letters, to me, this seems like a nice extension of that, because you're still trying to retain that person-to-person sort of feel to the way you organize a lot of your fundraising.
Definitely. Alrighty, and next up we wanted to highlight outreach from the University of Iowa. I believe some folks from Iowa are on the call today. Hi all, thanks for letting us share your great example here. So the University of Iowa paused their telefund outreach last year, and they wanted to do some outreach to folks who they normally would have called, letting them know, and you'll see this is the exact message here, that recipient name and sender name would be merge fields, letting them know we're reaching out because we're not calling you this year, but we want to hear from you. Do you have any questions about making your gift to the University of Iowa this year? So it's an ask, it's definitely an ask. It's a little bit softer, but it's more like, do you have any questions about making your gift? Just kind of letting people know we're not going to call you, but we still hope to hear from you and hope to see your renewed support. And then to share some results from that. So they broke out their segments and did a little bit of A/B testing. They texted a group of people over 35 and a group of people under 35 to see how different age groups would respond. I think a lot of us have the sort of assumption that most of the younger people will be more likely to respond to text messages. But broadly at Get Thru, that's not what we've seen. We've seen kind of equal response rates regardless of age group, which is really interesting. And Iowa really drives that case home here. Their group over 35 had a 13% response rate, whereas their group under 35 had about a 10% response rate, showing that, you know, in this instance, people over 35 responded at a higher rate, and just generally that many age groups are open and receptive and ready to start texting with you. They had a lower number of opt-outs for their over 35 group than the under 35 group. And then 128 people over 35 and 17 people under 35 pledged to give. Erin shared with me that 4 people gave via a trackable link that they included in their text messages. And then 51 people who had received text messages gave via other channels. So, you know, it's a nice way to touch base with folks if you're thinking about pausing or ending your phonathon, or if you just don't do phonathon. This can be another channel that you can use to make that connection. And it was also shared that many people actually thanked them for reaching out via text instead of by phone, because you know, no one picks up the phone these days. People love to text instead, and I think that's kind of a good example and kind of funny anecdote there.
Well, and Iowa made you know, the decision to pause their phonathon, but there's plenty of ongoing calling still at a lot of campuses where there's the continuing frustration these days of just getting people on the phone. I get to more phonathon rooms that are dial-a-thon rooms more than they're actually speaking with folks these days. To me, this seems like a very viable extension of the student calling team, which, you know, is increasingly referred to as the student philanthropy team at places. So I realize Iowa has seemed like they've had some success in the absence of calling, but I also can easily imagine places that use this as one more way to sort of deliver a "sorry we missed you" message these days.
Definitely. And speaking to that, there's a lot of different ways to use texting for phonathon and around phonathon. You could do fulfillment, where you can have your student philanthropy folks or whoever is in your call center reach out to the people that they actually called, thanking them for their pledge and saying, can I send you the link to make your gift now? And then, you know, when people respond and say, yes, please send me the link, you can just send it off to them, and then they can go ahead and make their gift right there. Just like you would in Phonathon when you send pledge fulfillment emails or pledge fulfillment receipts by mail. This is just a quicker way to do it. They'll have it right away on their phone, and while they're thinking of it, they can fulfill their gift.
Hey, Rachel, we've had a couple people zero in on this. And for the examples that you've been showing, the templates, you always have an initial message, and then it's the second message that has a link to a giving page. I mean, we already talked about how you're not in the gift flow business, but is
Right.
there a reason why you sort of softly approach people and then say, here's the link?
That's a great question. So our best practice that we found is to make the ask while building rapport in the first message, and then send the link as a follow-up when people say they'll give. With Phonathon fulfillment, I think it's a little bit different. If someone you've just spoken to says that they want to give, I think you can just say in your first message, thanks so much for your pledge. Here's the link to make your gift. Let me know if you have any questions. But when you're doing kind of cold text outreach or, you know, texting on giving day, I think it's always a good idea, just like you would with Phonathon or, you know, talking on the phone or in person directly with a prospect, to build that rapport, let them know they're hearing from a real person, and sort of get the conversation started first before sending off the giving link.
Building rapport, I have to chuckle that the channels change, right? But the best practice remains the same. They were
So
saying
true.
build rapport back when I was holding a banana to my ear all those years ago.
Right. It's so true. Alrighty, and then another way to use texting around Phonathon, you can do the "sorry we missed you" text. I mean, I know a lot of us have done this with "sorry we missed you" emails. You can reach out and say, we tried to call you tonight, but we got your voicemail. So sorry we missed you. Just saying thanks for your last gift of $50. Will you renew this year? And then you can have that giving link at the ready for when folks write back and say that they'd like to renew. And then another example we wanted to share is from an independent school, McDonough School. They did a campaign called 75 by 75 Parent Outreach. They texted at the end of last calendar year 3 parent segments asking them to help them get to 75% parent participation by the 75th day in the school year, which is just kind of a fun, memorable, campaign slogan, as it were, and a way to encourage parents to lend their support and be a part of, the community of donors to the school. They texted about 368 parents and got an 18% average response rate. And what they did was they, in their texting, asked parents to pledge a specific amount. They tracked those pledges later so they could follow up on them as needed. And then they shared that link immediately with those who pledged to give. And then what we have here, you'll see this relay icon exploding into the Get Thru icon. As Bob mentions, there's been a lot of texting companies around the conference circuit for a while now, including us. So if you're familiar with the name Relay, that's who we are. We changed our name about 6 months ago, but we're still the same company, same tools. So we just wanted to throw that in there in case you might have heard of us previously. So next up, I wanted to talk a little bit specifically about how our Get Thru's platform, which we call ThruText, works. So you're probably wondering, all right, there's all these great examples that you've shared about how all these schools have done these amazing things, but how does this actually work? So as a broad overview, how it works in our tool is you take your group that you want to text, you upload them into our system, you create a campaign in 6 steps, so you'll be able to kind of set your base parameters, pick the area code from which you'd like your text messages to appear, and then you can create scripting, or what we call recommended replies. You can create trackable, what we call survey questions. Those are fully internal, and it allows you to track conversation by conversation, how people responded, if they said they would give. You can add notes to their record, and this helps you build out your reports that you can pull after your campaigns to sort of, essentially build pledge reports, track how these conversations went. And then once your campaign is created, it takes just a couple minutes, you're ready to start texting. So what we can do now is I'm going to shift my screen a little bit and show you a demo of how this works. And you're going to kind of get behind the curtain look here for a second. So thanks to those folks who shared their phone numbers, you will actually get a text as part of this, this demo today. So I'm going to open this up. So this is what it looks like when you're texting on Get Thru's platform called ThruText. On the left-hand side, you'll see all the conversations that you're going to have. So you'll have each person, and you can kind of search here by name, find who you're texting. You'll see all the names here. Down here, you can write an initial message when you're setting up your campaign, include as many merge fields as you'd like. So you'll see this, this is a merge field, the first name, the sender name here, and then you can do some merge fields like, thanking them for their last gift. And I really encourage personalizing these messages as much as you can to say, where they gave their last gift to, if you have an ask amount, if you're asking them to upgrade. Think of it like you would with direct mail. Like, the better segmentation and personalization you can do, the more likely, it'll resonate with folks, if that makes sense. And then you can also create a campaign description, which will show over here on the right-hand side. Wanted to note as well, you can have as many users as you'd like on this ThruText platform, and you can set different permission levels for them. So if you did have student workers, graduate assistants, or volunteers, you can make it so when they log in, they're only able to see this side of the tool. But so when you're ready to get started, you just need to click send for each person. So I'm going to click send about 80 times here. It takes 2 to 3 minutes to send about 500 outbound messages, so you'll see it does go pretty quickly. And the reason that you do have to click send for each person is that it, so it remains a peer-to-peer interaction, and it's different from broadcast in that way. So as I keep sending here, hopefully you all will start to see your text messages soon, so you can see what those texts look like on your phone. You'll notice it comes from a real 10-digit number. So what you can do when you set up your campaigns, like I mentioned before, is select the area code from which you would like your text messages to be sent. So you can localize this to where your school is. If you're doing a regional event, you could always localize it to that region, or anything you can think of to localize your text. So I can see some folks have already responded. That's great. When people start writing back to you, you'll see their names pop back up over here on the left-hand side. and this teal button indicates that there's a response that you haven't yet written back to. You can sort these conversations in a couple different ways. So status or activity, just kind of sorting it by, when texts were received. You can also sort by name. So it'll, show up in alphabetical order by the first name. And then after your folks respond to you, you'll see 2 additional tabs show up on this right-hand panel over here. So the first one I want to cover are those survey questions that I briefly mentioned before. So like I said, this is a way for you to track who says that they'll give, so you can pull your reports later, and in this case, essentially generate a pledge report. You can build out as many of these survey questions as you'd like to make your data trackable. So Cheryl here has kindly said she will renew her gift. So for her,
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Cheryl. We appreciate it. For her, I'm going to indicate that she will give. If she were to say no, I have refusal reasons set up here so that I can track that as well. And then if there were any notes, like if Cheryl gave me updated contact information, if I feel like, oh, she should actually hear from a leadership gift officer or another department, I can enter those notes here and then follow up later. But then getting back into how we respond, so you can always type a free-form message here if you'd like to, but you can also build out what we call recommended replies, which is essentially your survey questions so that you don't have to type a brand new response every single time. And this is what makes peer-to-peer texting. It's one of those things that, while it's not automated and there's some human intervention required there, it makes it go faster. So since Cheryl has said yes, I have my recommended replies set up here. I have replies for when someone says they'll give, they won't give, if they prefer to give to another area of giving, if they share feedback, if they opt out. And you can build as many of these as you can think of. Think of it like you would for PHONATHON. Just set up those scripts, set up those recommended replies to make those conversations just as easy as possible. But for this instance, since she said yes, all I have to do is click on this plus sign. And then, that populates the message for me there. I can customize it if I need to. And then, of course, you got to add an emoji. People love emoji. And then you can send that off and see how it looks. And I also wanted to share just an example of what happens if someone writes back to you and says, take me off your list, or I don't want to receive text messages. So Emily here has said, you have the wrong number. Can you take me off your list? So what I might want to do for Emily is just make a note on her record that I have the wrong number from her. So that way, if, when I pull my reports later, I can go back and see that I have that wrong number and follow up via email or another channel to try to collect her new contact information. But all I need to do now to opt her out is click this opt out button right here. And then once I click opt out, you can write a message that will pre-populate confirming that we see that you don't want to receive text messages. We're going to remove you from the list right now. So once I click submit, it'll send Emily that final message, and it's going to clear her conversation from my dashboard, opting her out of this campaign and making sure that she is excluded from any future campaigns that I would do in Thru Text. So it's kind of, once the opt-out is done, it's just an exclusion across your entire account, so you never have to worry about texting someone that doesn't want to receive those messages.
Rachel, for the recipient, the text message is coming from whom?
It'll be a 10-digit number, and the number, so the folks who set up the campaign can select the area code. And then what we do at Get Thru is purchase enough phone numbers within that area code based on the list size, so that the school or the texter can text freely without getting flagged as spam or caught in the carrier. So it's not going to say a name. It's not going to say a location like it would when your phone rings. It's just going to have that 10-digit number.
And like your examples show, I mean, you're not trying to be sneaky about anything. You're saying, hi, it's Alec from College University, or it's Rachel from College University.
Exactly. Yeah. It's good to kind of establish who you are and why you're texting, so that folks are, they know exactly who they're talking to, if that makes sense.
And so for my Phonathon friends, importing a list, it could be the same list of people that you're importing for calling, right? And just because you don't necessarily send a message to everybody, they're all there in the platform if a caller wants to follow up with somebody for whatever reason, right?
That's right. The one distinction I'll make is that when you create a campaign in Get Thru, You do have to send all of the initial messages that are loaded first before you can see your replies. So if you did want to do kind of, a la carte texting, it might be a little bit of a different use case. But you can always kind of, if they just wanted to text those who they had reached, what they could do before they start texting is kind of search for their name, find them, and send that message off. But they wouldn't be able to see the replies from that person until all of their initial messages had been sent.
Got it. And my old friend Joe Ferraro's listening in, and he said that Siri outed you in saying that it was
Did
Rachel calling
she?
and your phone number.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Wow. Okay. Good to know. Thanks, Siri.
Don't underestimate Siri.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions there before we go back to the main event?
We just got one asked about scams, and is there any best
Hmm.
practice to really let people know that you're legitimate? I guess is the question.
That's a good question. I mean, I think the main way is, like you said, Bob, to be really straightforward about who you are, where you're texting from, and what your ask is. You could also send an email to folks ahead of time just saying, hey, we're going to start texting now. Just letting you know that it's going to come from this specific area code. This is the type of messaging you can expect so that you don't feel thrown off when you receive a message. This also gives you the opportunity to hear from folks who might not want to hear from you via text messaging. You don't have to say in that email, you don't have to ask for specific opt-in permission, but if people get that email and say, well, I don't want to get text messages, they can write you back and then, let you know. And then at that point, you would know not to include them on your texting list.
Good.
Alrighty, I'm going to navigate back over here. So a couple things just on peer-to-peer texting generally. So in looking at our response rates, we find it's better than a general text response. And like I said before, because it's peer-to-peer, person-to-person, there's no opt-in needed. The average reply rate that we've seen is between 20 and 30%. It really depends on your list though. Like live ones and current donors, just like with any other channel, you're probably going to see a higher response rate from them. If your list is mixed with a lot of non-donors or recent grads that haven't given yet, folks like that, your response rate might be lower. And we see between a 2 to 5% average opt-out rate, again, depending on the constituents on your list. I kind of talked up before how fast through text is. Wanted to mention also that texters can usually get through 500 to 2,000 conversations within an hour or so. It really depends on how often people are texting back, how fast they are, how familiar they are with the platform. But like you saw, it does make it really easy to manage those conversations and get through them in a very timely manner. So thinking about strategy here, and Bob, I'd love to hear your thoughts too as the annual giving guru. Like you said before, the channels change, but the strategy, the best practices remain the same. So just like you think about when you're setting up your campaigns broadly for the year, think about when you're planning for texting, who do you want to text? Think about which audiences you want to target, how you're going to segment them, what messaging you're going to use, and speaking to that, what do you want to say? What are you hoping to get from them? Make your outreach clear, have really strong scripting, and just make a persuasive case. Think about who's going to send the messages. So are you a shop of one? What can you manage on your own? Can you bring in volunteers, student workers, other staff members? Just think about who's going to be a part of your texting plan. Coordinate when you send the messages. So just like your general giving channels, this doesn't need to be something separate. It really should be part and parcel of what you're doing already for annual giving. So, kind of time it out just like you would. You're not going to send all of your email outreach on the same day, right? You're not going to send an email and direct mail to hit at the same time. Kind of build out your strategy so that it's just you're building upon your outreach throughout the year. And then after your campaigns, do make sure to download your data, analyze your results, and think about what lessons learned and best practices can you take into your future text outreach.
I would just add that, like I said at the beginning, my education in all this has been to understand the different uses of text these days, rather than the sort of one-dimensional way that we started with text way back when. So for those kind of institutions that really want that person-to-person flavor or that fits their brand, I think the kind of platform that you offer is exactly the kind of extension of the way they've been doing fundraising with some of their audiences for a long time now.
Right, right. Yeah, and then just kind of touching on some best practices. We kind of covered this before, but when you start with that initial message, ask a question to promote engagement and get people to respond to you. You can ask them, do you need the link to fulfill? Do you have any questions about making your gift this year? Sort of warm them up and build that rapport like we talked about earlier. You can use a tool in through text called follow-ups to send follow-up messages to non-responders. So you can build kind of a mini campaign within your campaign that'll let you follow up with those who just haven't responded to you at all. And then we found that messages that are sent around lunchtime or late afternoon have slightly higher response rates. It's when folks are taking a break from work, but they're not yet home yet. So they're kind of, they might be a little more attentive to their phone during that time throughout the day. Definitely recommend building out those recommended replies and your scripting. It just makes your conversations go a lot faster. And if you have volunteers working with you, it makes their jobs easier. And then, of course, make it fun, personalize your text and use emoji. I definitely recommend using proper grammar, proper case, everything like that in your text, but it doesn't have to be necessarily as formal as other outreach that you do. It is text messaging. So think of how folks talk to each other through that channel and adapt it for your messaging in your school. And of course, use emoji.
And I still have to laugh that a lot of those thoughts were best practice for a bunch of other channels that we've come through over the years. For anybody who has a hard stop at the top of the hour, we have 3 slides left. So if you can hang in, great. If not, we'll send you the whole thing when we're done. Go ahead, Rachel.
Alrighty. So just thinking a little bit further into some inspiration and ideas, talking a little bit more about what we've covered here. You can do texting for Giving Tuesday, year-end outreach. Giving Tuesday is a great use case because, everyone is kind of reaching out for it, but you don't have to build a big campaign around it. You can just do some outreach to live events or folks that you're hoping to reach generally. We've seen how texting works really well for giving days, pledge fulfillment, live event renewal, and then that PHONATHON and direct mail, kind of building around that. So you could either do a follow-up to PHONATHON like we talked about before. You could do follow-up or preview of phone or direct mail saying, we're going to be calling soon, or we hope you saw our direct mail piece, or look out for this piece of direct mail. Just a way to kind of use that additional channel to boost what you're already doing. A couple more inspiration and ideas here. I've seen schools do a young alumni contact info drive, so you can reach out to your recent grads and say, congratulations on your recent graduation. We wanted to collect your most recent address so that we can keep in touch with you. If you share your address today, we'll send you, you could send them like a sticker or something small to keep them engaged. You can do those reunion and class campaigns that we talked about earlier. You can also do texting for senior class gifts. So if you have a team that's working on that, or a kind of student committee that's working on it, texting is a great way to leverage that peer-to-peer messaging that often happens with the senior class gift and reach the millennials and the next generation on their cell phones, which they're on all the time. And then for ideas beyond your annual giving and fundraising outreach, do stewardship. Maybe beyond just sending a Valentine's Day email or card, what you can do is send a text to all of your donors from the previous calendar year and just say, thanks so much, reaching out to say, we appreciate you on Valentine's Day. And then lastly, get creative and use texting for event outreach and registration, event confirmation, and that concierge like we talked about with Haverford.
Rach, we have a couple quick, really good questions. Aaron, our old friend at Iowa, wants you to say what happens when people try to call back on the number that you text them from.
That's a great question. Thanks for raising it, Aaron. So in through text, what happens, since you're texting from real 10-digit phone numbers, people can pick up their phone and call you back. And what it looks like, you would get a little pop-up in your platform that would say, Rachel Cleary is trying to call you. And then when that person calls, they get connected to your voicemail that you can customize through text. And if they leave you a voicemail, another pop-up will show, and you can listen to it there and hear what they're saying. You have a couple different options in that moment. You can write them back and say, sorry, I can only text right now, especially if it's a student doing your texting. Or you could call them back from your landline if you happen to know their phone number. Through Text also has an option by which you can click a button and your phone number that's associated with your account will ring, and then it'll patch you through to the person who texted you. The number that they would see on their phone is the same number from which you previously texted them, so there's some consistency there. But it doesn't share your phone number or their phone number with the person calling them back. So there's a couple different ways to handle calls.
And then I thought of this. Somebody can't differentiate what's a landline phone number and a cell phone number. Is there any help you can offer with that? And just out of curiosity, what happens when you're trying to text a landline? It just do you get any notice that your call cannot be completed as dialed?
That's a great question. So we do have a tool for that. When you upload your list to the platform, it'll go through and validate every single number that you have on your list, and it'll pull out any landlines, any cell phones that aren't in service. So that way, you're not charged for texting someone who cannot be texted. So there's mechanisms there to help you out with that.
And then the last question that came in really referenced my concert giving example at the beginning, that you could automatically have queued up, a reply with a link to a way to complete a gift. You're just not the company that provides the way to complete the gift, right?
That's right. So we don't have the capability to do inbound texting, or we don't do the payment processing, but there's tons of options out there that do.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Alrighty.
Last but not least.
So my quick pitch, Get Thru offers a free trial of our Thru Text texting product for educational institutions and nonprofits. It's a 1-month trial, including 1,000 contacts. So you can have unlimited messages back and forth in that month with 1,000 unique phone numbers. That trial includes training and support. So, we'll get you set up with your best foot forward to make sure that, it's a productive trial for you and gives you a good sense of how folks respond and if texting is the right solution for you. And then of course, we've got that fun little dog icon there. Can't finish without including that little joke, but that's my pitch.
You're very proud of that.
I am.
My last commercial message, and Rachel, thanks for all that. I really do see usefulness in that, whether it's through Get Thru or some other functionality. I do think that's a viable new channel for what we do in fundraising. Couple quick conferences I just want to get on people's radar if they're not already. I have long been a fan of the Northeast Annual Giving Conference, which is going to be in Buffalo, March 16th and 17th. Come celebrate St. Patrick's Day the Buffalo way, and come and join me there. Next one is the West Coast Meeting of the Minds, which I think Rachel's going to be at down in Pomona, on the campus of Cal Poly Pomona. There's the website. Follow the details as those start to come together. Then I've got the Carolinas Annual Giving Conference. If you want to come to Asheville, North Carolina, and who wouldn't, at the end of July. I'm on that committee, and I'm proud of the content that's being pulled together for that program. And my old buddy John Taylor will join me in Chicago again this year, August 5th through the 7th, we're right in the middle of downtown Chicago, the next one there for the Midwest Meeting of the Minds Conference. And anybody who's traditionally come to the CASE Senior Annual Giving Conference, I chaired that for the past 3 years, and I would always make fun of the name Senior Annual Giving Conference. I don't know if it was because of me, but they've now changed the name of the conference. So if you're looking for it, it's now called CASE Advanced Annual Giving Strategies. Our old friend and Iowan, Howard Hebner, who's at UC Santa Cruz, is chairing that. That's April 29th through May 1st in Washington, D.C. And so we wish him well with all that. And then my last slide, I think, is just this food truck shot. If you don't want to come to any of those conferences, have me over to your place or come up with a new location. There's some folks listening in from a Seattle pop-up annual giving day I did just 10 days ago. And thanks to all of you folks for coming as well. Okay, Rachel, anything else you want to say? I think we're caught up with questions, but anybody can feel free to send us a message when we're done, and we'll send out the slides and the recording if you want to refresh your memory on anything we talked about today. Well done, Rachel. Anything else you want to say?
That's it for me. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. Thanks, Bob, for being here and sharing great history and chatting with me. And like you say, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be in touch to send you the recording and slides.
And thanks for the education. And thanks to everybody listening in. Hope that was useful, and good luck in your future fundraising. Over and out.
All right. Thanks, all. Take care.